And hello, welcome to How to Recover from Trauma podcast episode, I believe 3.
3. I think it is 3.
Nice.
Yeah.
Me and Claire again. We'll have guests soon, but at the moment, it's me and Claire.
Hello. It's
And
great
I
to
am
be
Betsy.
back.
I guess that I'm Betsy de Thierry. You are?
Claire. Tinker.
So we are going to talk again about how to recover from trauma. Please send in your questions because we'd love to actually answer questions.
But you've had a few through.
Yes. The lovely Mary Glasgow, who she's the CEO of an amazing organisation up in Scotland, Children First. She asked on LinkedIn, she said, can you do one on the power of relationships? So let's spend half an hour exploring that, don't you think?
I think it's amazing. Very central to trauma and trauma recovery.
Yeah. In fact, one of the biggest problems of trauma is the disconnection from others. It's that sense of I can maybe be around other people, but actually I feel disconnected from other people because of what's happened to me. And I can't talk about it, or I can't explain it. I can't use words around it. And so I'm hiding a part of myself, and hiding a part of myself means that I don't feel connected and I don't have that sense of belonging. That's on a very basic level. That's just an automatic reaction. Unless, of course, there's been a type 1 trauma experience where there isn't shame attached, in which case, actually, you can kind of pretty much run into school as a child and say, my rabbit died. I'm gutted. And hopefully you'd have a group of children come around you and even cry with you about your bunny rabbit, and that sense of being part of a group of people that are mourning with you of the loss of your pet. And that can be a very positive experience of grief.
Yeah.
But that's a type 1 trauma. Type 2 and 3, of course, on my trauma continuum, usually there's not really many words.
Why is that?
There's no words usually because of the level of shock. So if type 1's a single incident, there's not so much shame involved. And so people can usually say what's happened to them. Not everyone. They don't want to announce it to the world, but they'll tell some chosen relationships. And in the context of those chosen relationships, they should be able to explore a little bit how they feel. But if it's a type 2 trauma experience where something might happen again, so those are the kind of things like abuse and domestic abuse and sexual abuse, physical abuse, that kind of thing, then or actually bullying, those sort of things, then actually the child, young person or adult actually is usually in a place where they're not sure they can tell anyone. There's often secrets involved. If they tell somebody, they might get further into trouble. But also, as you know, because I teach it a lot, the Broca's area of the brain does actually just stop working when it comes to that because of the level of terror, the level of absolute terror and overwhelm in the experience means that they can't find the words, really.
Yeah. And I guess that just exacerbates that feeling of something's really wrong with me if you can't even find the words or communicate. And I think loads of us can relate to that, can't we? Of you want to try and communicate something, but the words don't come out, and then you leave thinking, how did I not? And hoping for that connection, but walking away, you almost then feel worse because you haven't had that connection. So yeah, that's so central. And I guess through all of your books, the theme of relationships to help then connect, have that connection and see that as central to healing is in every single one of these titles, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. It is. Along with kind of, I guess, attachment theory is the primary kind of piece of research we'd base that on. Shall I?
Let's assume no one knows, because I think that's always a good way for the podcast.
Okay. So attachment theory first explored and coined by Bowlby. And he and Ainsworth, must talk about Ainsworth, Mary Ainsworth, they basically did an experiment, and the short version would be they were experimenting to see the relationship between a small child and their mum, actually, and what that looked like. And if the mum suddenly disappeared, how they responded. Or if the mum had a cross, angry face, how they responded. And that experiment looked became the foundation of lots of experiments and lots of research that led to us understanding attachment, is that natural, instinctive relationship between a baby and their primary caregiver, where they feel a sense of safety and security, and even if the parent disappears, a positive and healthy attachment relationship means that the child knows they're about to come back, so they're waiting and then they're relieved. So there's a little bit of stress, but then they're relieved. And there's a lot to talk about in terms of attachment, but ultimately when we recognise when a child has gone through a traumatic experience, if they've got a positive attachment relationship that's not a short-term one, it's a longer-term one, then actually they have a much higher possibility of recovering from trauma than if they haven't got anybody at all. And of course, we recognise that a lot of people with very complex trauma histories, where there's lots of secrets, they're unable to tell anyone, so actually they can't build that relationship because that person might begin to ask questions or notice different elements of distress about the child, which could lead to questions, which could lead to the child feeling even more terrified that they might get into further trouble because the secret's out. So relationships are a big reason why, if you experience a type 1 trauma, you can actually recover in the context of relationships. And if it's 2, so something that's repetitive and often, if you've got even one attachment relationship, so a teaching assistant, a learning support assistant, anybody in a school, somebody that looks, I don't know, the brownies leader, the scout leader, the youth group leader, somebody, an adult that cares, and you as a child know that they care, that is a resilient factor to the impact of trauma. It decreases the negative impact of trauma. It's massively important because it's a safe place.
Yeah. And do you think that's like kind of changed like the importance of people within schools or like different professionals being able to form those relationships like over the years? Do you think that's changed a lot?
Yeah, completely. Yeah. I think first of all, schools were a lot smaller. Classes were smaller. And when you have less children in a class, I'm a teacher as well. I'm a qualified teacher, and I taught in actually quite big schools with big classes, but the national curriculum was just being introduced. That's how old I am. And so we didn't have the pressure of SATs, exams, tests. We very much would assess a child according to our understanding. So we do very natural, intuitive tests, if you like, apart from things like reading schemes. So we knew how they were doing with that. So it was a very relationally based assessment. We knew the child. We knew each child individually. We knew where they flourished and where they were absolutely delighted to learn in that area and hated another area. And it was very intuitive how we then taught each individual class. So back when I was a teacher in the 90s, it was very relationship based. Teachers now, many of whom are still my age and teaching, and then all the ones that have come after that, are wanting to be the same. But there's more children, less finances, more children with special educational needs, and more children who have grown up in really difficult situations with trauma symptoms that actually destabilise classrooms and cause other children distress, because as they're coping with their trauma in spaces where maybe they're not trauma informed, maybe they don't understand the process of trauma recovery. So this child feels very alone and very, very unable to communicate what their needs are. And they've got one adult, maybe between 30 children, or 2 adults, but the other adult is allocated to one other child. So they're struggling to know how to communicate what their needs are. And sometimes that will come out in hypo-aroused, I'm doing that for the window of tolerance, hypo-aroused behaviours. So they'll zone out, dissociate, numb themselves, not really be here, or they'll hyper-arouse, and that's when generally there might need to be some additional support. Actually, we know that the ones who hypo-arouse also need support.
Yeah. So I guess it is really key that like kids have more people in their world who can like have that just relational element, because I know you work with a lot of NGOs as well, who can do more of that side of things. So that's really positive. But I'm just thinking of like, I think it's kind of easier to look at the power of relationships when it goes wrong sometimes, because then you see how it impacts a human. And I can think of all the like safeguarding training I've been in, where you've done those case studies of there were so many people who were having touch points with that child, and then it all fell through the gaps. So how can we, as like people working around kids especially, like focus in, I guess, on the kids when there is so much to do around, I mean, I don't need to tell you, governance and, you know, meeting all the requirements that you have to.
I think that's why we try and talk about the child at the centre.
Yeah.
They have to stay in the centre rather than the system. And so often the system becomes the centre, but actually it's the child and the child's voice that's the centre.
Yeah.
What are they trying to say? How can we amplify their voice? How can we help them communicate non-verbally? How can we help them communicate what their needs are? And that really is only through relationship. It really, really is. It's through relationship, through time spent with, when a child or a young person is able to spend time with somebody who is kind, compassionate, attuned, they're able to tune in to the other child, to the child, and have a sense of what's going on for them, if they're having a good day, a bad day, or a medium day. Have that safety around them, where the adult has got to know them and has got to know what things they love and what things they hate. The little things. I often tell teachers, one of the quickest and easiest and most powerful things you can do is remember something that happens at home, like they've got a pet, you know, a pet rabbit called Daisy. And you can just, it takes time and skill and energy, but you can casually go, oh, how's Daisy a rabbit? Those little things actually enable the child to feel seen and heard, which enables them to feel safer, which actually does without doubt reduce their trauma symptoms. Everyone wants to be seen and heard.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I guess, so you have your wonderful handbook here, like, because you talk about relationship, well, throughout the whole thing, but is there any like key, like strategic things that you want to comment on of like for recovery, like what that looks like?
That's a great question, actually. I don't know what I'm going to answer apart from, I guess, because look, I found a chapter called Relationships That Can Facilitate Healing, chapter 3. So I could talk about the things that are there. But I think if you turn to the back bit is my trauma recovery focus model. There it is, if you can see it in the camera. And that one is really about the wiggly path. And I've got a download on my website of the wiggly path of trauma recovery. And that really talks about the different stages of trauma recovery. And of course, it's not linear. Of course.
That would be too easy.
Of course it's not. It's wiggly, right?
Yeah.
But within it, I don't think just having a therapist is the answer, because that would cost too much. They're too expensive. You can't have a therapist for 2 or 3 years usually. So ideally, you have a safe person, a mentor, somebody who's just lovely and understands trauma and is able to offer that safe relationship, who will be consistent for, I would say, more than a year, preferably. You know, a couple of years, 3 years in primary school, having that person that's always around would be ideal, and the same in secondary school. And if you can have that person as a safe place and a safe person that you can run to, you can go to, who you know is going to be there and available for you, and then maybe at some point a little bit later you have a therapist for a period of time, that's amazing. But it's the two different people. And then of course, if you can add to that a lovely social worker who also could be the mentor person, the safe, consistent person, or it could be, there's various other professions that could be that safe person that's going to be there for you for a period of time. But when it comes to that ending, we need to recognise the level of pain that can cause. And as you know, one of our big policies is an open door policy.
Yeah.
I love an open door policy. What do you love about the open door policy?
Well, I've seen the benefits of the open door policy at the therapy centres, because you see kids actually just pop back in sometimes, and they literally either just want to show how tall they've got, or they just want to have a look around. They want to just have a drink and remember the time that they were there. But often they do actually really come in and say, I want to tell you something good that's happening in my life. And they want to show how things have progressed, which is such... I mean, it's stunning. I mean, you have to like not cry at that point, but we cry afterwards, but you know, it's fine. But also knowing that they've got that connection back of that safety of, you are still here though. And you know, occasionally they do say, I want to come back actually for another period of time. They might just come as a one-off, but it might not be. And that is, you know, the beauty of consistency, I guess. And consistency of relationship. Because otherwise it feels a bit fake. And I know that not everybody can offer that. Maybe they don't have buildings that have got that kind of access. So I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, but I do feel like it's a beautiful thing. And I've also taught thousands of schools, and I say to them, please expect when your children have gone through to secondary school and they're doing okay, they might need to pop back. And they might not know why they want to pop back. They might just want to come and say, well, I just wanted to see it. But actually it's because you were a safe school, and they've got attachment relationships in the school, and they want to pop back for that sense of, are you still here? Do you still know me? Am I still seen and heard? Do you remember when I was little? Do you remember what I was like? Do you remember when I had my pet rabbit? I don't know where that pet rabbit... Daisy's come back from. Like, but that thing is that consistency, that long-term, the opposite of fake, the opposite of unauthentic, the opposite of, well, I'm just doing a job. I'm sorry, you've been paid for 6 sessions. That's it now. Goodbye. That's not relationship. That's the opposite of trauma-informed. That's all clinical and harsh. We have to be authentic in our care for humans, because all humans pick up on that. I don't think you can fake it for long. And I think the beautiful thing about, especially the trauma recovery centres that you run, is like they get to see quite a few different teams. It's not just the therapist. Like, you're so intentional of like whoever's answering the door to whoever's on the admin team, like, and actually we do remember them. I remember kids coming in like so short and then you see them like within the next 10 years and they're so tall, and you're like, how has this happened? But it is beautiful. And it is really, it feels more community based, balanced with, obviously we're here to help you heal really well. community based, that's a whole thing. Because I would argue that a lot of the, you know, the rising mental health stats, which you would know that I think is a lot connected to experiences of trauma that haven't had trauma recovery focused help. I think a lot of it is due to things like closing of youth clubs. Those places that were Sure Start centres, those places which didn't just have so much vigorous... We've got so many clinical assessments of everything. But where's the community centres of just drop in for a cup of tea? Just come and play ping pong for a little bit. That's what I think the world needs right now. If we had to put money anywhere, I'd say we need more money for trauma therapy this end, where you have to have lots of training. But I would say also we desperately need those family centres, those youth centres, those prevention of postnatal depression groups for mums that are pregnant, the ones for when you've just had your first baby and you've no idea what you're doing, because I don't think anyone knows what they're doing. You know, when you're navigating toddlers, who do you turn to then? When all of the different stages of life, I think there should be community centres where there's that sense of shared experience and belonging. Definitely. And I think that's a prevention of trauma, and I think it's also trauma recovery. You can recover to a degree, not from the complex trauma, but you can recover to a degree from some of the symptoms, the kind of the side effects of trauma, like isolation and feeling like you don't belong and feeling like you're different to everyone else and feeling like maybe you're not really good enough to be part of that group of people, and the shame stuff that just makes you either want to protect yourself or hide. I think those kind of things can really be healed, and
in those kind of community settings.
Yeah, because I think we've even seen it like just with your neighbours. People know their neighbours less and less, don't they? I think that's hugely changed, and it probably does correlate in some ways to like the rise in like digital world. And people are more and more looking to like online connection, which obviously has its benefits. But like, what would you say are like the key bits that get missed when you're doing it online as opposed to like in person? Like, if you were to argue either way, could we just build digital communities across the world which will meet everything?
Wow, no. Is the short answer. No. They can be helpful. We have online therapy sometimes, and we certainly discovered that in COVID. I now do some online training. Don't find it wildly easy. I much prefer to be in a room. Why do I prefer to be in a room? Either with therapy or with training. Because I can have a sense of how people are doing, which is more intuitive. It's more to do with your nervous system. I can pick up other people's nervous system and their sense of relaxation and ease, or their kind of agitation and their just tension, and you can't online. You just can't. So give me a group of humans that are breathing in a room, and that's a completely different sense of relationship and connectivity. In terms of online relationships generally, I think we are living in a society where our young people are very muddled with a lot of social media, which is horrific and confusing and causing them to have highs and lows emotionally without staying in the window of tolerance, where they don't feel so in control, so they're trying to control it. So I think a lot of our young people are kind of becoming or are addicted to these highs, or they're just surfing on a continual low, where they've kind of almost given up hope for a high. They're just exhausted with life, and too much overwhelm and too much stimulation and too much everything that isn't actually reaching the depth of them. It's all very superficial.
Yeah, wow. I think we talked like really briefly about this earlier, and we won't go into it in too much detail on this one, but we talked about adolescence a little bit earlier as well, and like how, you know, there's such a risk as well of people building relationships online with people who aren't who they say they are. And how can we, I guess, help safeguard against that? How can we help? Because because you're also a parent, you've also had 4 kids who've gone through different levels of social media being available. Like, what words of wisdom do you have around that?
Goodness.
That's really putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I know it is.
Podcasts are interesting, aren't they?
Yeah, they really are weird. Adolescence, look, I only watched it last night, so, you know, give me some credit there. I watched it last night after, I don't know when it came out, but I've had a lot of emails and online, actually, social media. Have you watched it? Are you going to give your opinion? I hadn't had time.
Yeah.
Last night, I watched 2 out of 4, I think, episodes. And I loved it, actually. I thought it was fantastic in terms of, from what my perspective is, quite a real perception of current secondary school experiences, and lots of misunderstanding and lots of chaos. They're not all that complex. There are some excellent and very, very calm schools around, but there are some that are really struggling with different intakes of children that have just experienced so much trauma, and there isn't enough one-to-one relationship available. And we need more. In fact, really adopt a granny. I've never said that before. That came straight to my mind as I said it. Yeah, seriously. We've got so many old people. I'm not old, I'm 53. Like, old people that I think would love to adopt a teenager. We've got so many teenagers that actually really want to sit and ask real questions about life and make sense of life with somebody that's going to be really honest. And tell stories. I've never had that idea before, but I think that's a thing. Because relationships are needed for these young people. My kids and social media, they were different. Each child has been different in what I've talked about, but ultimately I've explained that it's fake. That it's fake. Everything's filtered, edited, People are choosing what bits they put on. They're not filming themselves washing the dishes, are they? Do we still wash dishes?
Some people do.
Saucepans.
Yeah, the bits that are going to get
You're not
killed
gonna
in
do
the
that.
dishwasher.
That's right, yeah. But like real life isn't on there a lot, is it?
Yeah,
It's
no.
either the highlights or it's the faking or it's the lowlights. There's not the day-to-day experience of life, which means that when people go through the day-to-day experiences of life, they actually feel like there's something wrong with them and they're weird. Like, why am I doing this? Am I normal? And that's, of course, where if every child or young person has at least one adult who can kind of do a bit of, well, this is what life is.
Yeah.
This is how life is. This is normal.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated on that what is normal question.
Yeah, go on.
I think a lot of people want to know what is normal. And I think a lot of children go through suffering and neglect and abuse and things, and they don't know it's not normal because no one's told them it's not normal.
Yeah.
A lot of trauma people don't know is not normal, and when they hear maybe somebody that's doing a safeguarding talk, or they have somebody that comes to school and explains something and they go, so that's not normal? That shouldn't happen to me? That's the very beginning of the possibility of them being able to recover from their trauma. Because it starts at, this should not happen to me.
Yeah.
Historically, I think most kids don't really know that. They're not sure. They have a sense of it's not okay. How do they know it's not okay? In relationships.
Yeah.
When other people talk about what happens when they go home.
Yeah. Yeah.
When other kids say, well, when I go home, this is what happens. And a child can sit there and go, that's not what happens to me.
Yeah.
That's the beginning of them beginning to ask for or want safety.
Yes. And not mixing up, I guess, normal with common. Like, as in, we know that, like, the prevalence of different types of abuses have risen really sadly, but it doesn't mean that should be held as normal. We need more and more voices to say
absolutely
what is normal and what's not normal.
Absolutely. And what should childhood be like? Bring back parks. Bring back open green spaces. Bring back cycling around in a cul-de-sac. Bring back climbing trees,
scraping your knee.
Yeah, all of that.
Yeah.
Bring back more of that and less online because they're quiet. Children aren't really meant to be very quiet.
Yeah.
And we've got a very quiet childhood happening where a lot of children, I wrote about it recently. I went to a particular city that I go to quite often, and I drove there, parked my car, jumped out, wanted to go and get a coffee, and I saw 7 buggies. I counted them, 7 buggies, all with children, not facing each other, but facing externally to nothing with screens, and they were all under 2. So they were between 1 and maybe 2.5, and they were all staring at a screen with a big iPad. And I was absolutely mortified, and there was a bunch of mums who were obviously struggling. They weren't finding it easy, and they were all having a coffee together while all these buggies of stationary, quiet children. Yeah. That's not how children should function. Yeah. You know, the odd half an hour, sure, but oh my goodness, the pain of them growing up quite shut down, quite disconnected from reality, just needing that numb and that sense of not having to be relationally connected. So actually relationships then can be a little bit less controllable, less predictable, a little bit terrifying for them, which is why then we're having to offer therapy quite often to children that haven't had enough relational experiences, so that we can build that template of what it could be like to have a consistent attachment figure that's caring and empathetic and able to facilitate conversation on a deeper level than what do you want for dinner.
Yeah. And that's quite an interesting example that you just gave, because actually if there were 7 of them, they've already got a community there.
Yeah.
So I guess part of it is finding communities, but part of it is this education of when screen time works developmentally, and when it's going to help disconnect.
Yeah, that's really true.
And maybe, I mean, the other thing that comes to my mind, but I think we've run out of time for today, but maybe a future one would be to talk about like COVID and the impact of COVID and what that needs to look like for, I mean, so many kids still. I think people have sort of put that topic down now, but we know that it needs to not be put down fully.
Absolutely. No, because it's still having an impact on today's children. on everybody, actually. Really important topic. Yeah, you're right. Those 7 children in buggies. Do you know, I never... In my head, I went to, let's teach the mums how to not do that, and let's help the mums feel more supported and connected and resourced to parent. But I hadn't thought about if we just put them all in a hall with some toys. You're absolutely right. That's then a toddler group. And that's a fantastically healthy resource, which builds both the parents' interpersonal relationships and the children's. Yeah, good point. Oh, we've hardly scratched the surface of relationships.
It's going to have to be a part 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Oh, I think I feel like we haven't got very far, but we've begun. We've just introduction to exploring relationships as both prevention, resilience factor, and the possibility of trauma recovery as well. There you go. Thanks for joining us. See you again soon. Bye. Thanks, Claire.
Bye.